Today, we'll talk about rental yield. What is rental yield? Rental yield is a definition of the return on a property as a percentage of its value. So basically, there are two types. You've got a gross rental yield and you have a net rental yield. So gross property yield is the rent divided by the property value times 100, and that'll give you a gross yield. The net yield is obviously minus all the expenses, your rates, your insurances and things like that, and that'll give you your net. Why does rental yield matter? Well, rental yield matters because the rental yield is how you close the gap between your mortgage payments and obviously the tax claims that you get at the end. Also, the higher the rental yield often leads to a better area. Infrastructure and things like that will demand a higher rent, which gives you a better yield. Also, there's a lot more capital growth in those type of areas with higher yields. A lower yield obviously means there's a problem to drag that yield down. Usually there's no growth, there's not a lot of movement in the market, and there's a reason for that. So we look for a better yield for a better return. What's considered a good yield in Australia? Well, look, if we wound the clock 10 years ago, a good rental yield would be high 3s to low 4s, 3.8 to a 4.2. In the current market, a good rental yield is low 5s. So we have a higher yield at the moment than we have in past years. The reason why is we have such a shortfall of properties out there, so there's a lot more demand and there's a little less supply. Look, the rule of thumb is between 4 and 5%. You don't want anything less than that. Anything more than that's obviously a bonus, but that is the yield that we look for when we talk investing. Where to find good rental yields? Well, this is really easy, to be honest. There's certain things you look for in areas that are going to obviously demand a yield. Low vacancy rates, so obviously low supply, high demand, that's definitely going to drive a yield up. Infrastructure is a really big thing. So for example, schools in the area, private schools in the area, shopping centres. Infrastructure is a big thing, transport, things like that. That's going to demand a high yield naturally. They're the main indicators that we look for looking for a high yield. So how I would find those type of properties is first of all maps. So just by going on your Google Maps or driving through the areas, you can see the infrastructure being built and you can see the infrastructure that's already there. That's one way I would do it. The other way is CoreLogic. Going on CoreLogic, you can do like how many properties are on the market. Even realestate.com, they can do that as well. So if you jump on the area, you punch it in and there's only one property for lease, well, there's a high demand there and the yield's naturally going to be high. You could put your yield at 5%, someone's going to rent it because the area is demanding that. That's often schooling will do that. If you have a really good school in the area, that is going to create a lot of demand because you've got to be in the region to get your kids into those schools. So they're good indicators. But that's how I'd find it. Maps, CoreLogic, touch on realestate.com. How do we help clients balance yields from growth? It's really important you have both. So the mistake investors make is they focus on one and forget about the other. We don't retire on rent, so it's really important that there's growth tied to these yields. So if you have a high yield and there's no capital growth, at the end of the day, all you're going to collect over the 10 years is just some tax claims. That's why growth is also important. If you focus on the growth on its own, then you're going to get in 10 years have growth. But because you've been so out of pocket over that journey, it's not as big as claim as what we want. So it's really important you balance the two out. We want a nice yield that's covering our expenses and we're making some money, and we want good capital growth because that's our retirement plan. So what we do, it's all about area. Fringe areas with brand new properties being built with infrastructure being new is naturally going to give you growth. But then the trick to that is making sure you're in a growth corridor where them yields are going to continue to grow as well. And that's why they use companies like Pinnacle Choice. The reason you use us is we know how to find that and how to balance that. We know what that future pattern is, and we've been doing this a long time. So rental yields are just one piece of the puzzle. There's obviously a lot of pieces to this puzzle. The thing about a rental yield is it takes away that little bit of risk. So one of the scary things for people when they're investing is the worry of renting the property. So by having a high rental yield, you take away that risk. So it's a bit of a safety net. You're going to rent the property. So look, really, it's just one part of many pieces, and tune in and we'll have more to talk about in the next video.